G'day folks, my name is Rob. Welcome back to another F1 fantasy video. The game has finally launched. I'm so excited. It's only a few days until Bahrain kicks off and this could probably be the best F1 fantasy season yet. Today I want to cover my team selection, a few different draft builds ahead of the first race. So if you like what you see, be sure to show some love to the video and to the channel. But let's get straight into it. So I've got on my screen here my first team. You probably saw that in the thumbnail. I've tinkered a little bit with it and I'm still not entirely settled, but I've decided with this build to go with triple Red Bull. The reason why I like that so much is because obviously Max Verstappen, he is one of the highest owned picks in the game so far and is the obvious choice for your DRS boost. He won 50% of races last season. I expect that will probably be the same, if not even better, in 2023. So he's a no-brainer for me. The other two locks for me, regardless of how my team shakes out in the very end, is Fernando Alonso and the Red Bull constructor. Alonso had an incredible preseason. The testing, Aston Martin have been looking really good, and realistically at 8.3 million, he is an absolute bargain. I honestly think he should be priced double what he is, but at 8.3, he absolutely needs to be in your team. He is, I think, the highest owned asset in the game at the moment, 68% of all drivers. I think that's higher than any of the constructors. So Fernando, for obvious reasons, is going to be in a lot of people's teams. He'll definitely be part of that template initially. And unless there's anything to suggest Aston Martin don't replicate that form they had in testing, they're probably going to be expected to be the fourth best constructor on the grid this season, even rivaling the top three teams. For Red Bull, much like Max, and because of Max, they are straight into my team. Again, at 27.2, probably a little bit on the cheap side for my liking. Because of that, they are also a very highly owned asset. But because of the scoring weighted towards constructors this season, Red Bull, I think, are must-have. They wiped the floor last season. They were pretty consistent across the board, scoring 40, 50 points a week. I know the scoring metrics have changed this season, but I still think they are in must-have territory. So I guess while we're on the topic of Red Bull, I've got in this build Sergio Perez. He looked really good in testing. He just missed out on second in the World Drivers' Championship last season at 18 million. I almost think that's probably a little cheap again for him. If we go look at the drivers on the right-hand side here and sort them by value, I'm very surprised he was priced below George Russell. I'm not saying Russell is a bad driver. I think 18.6 for him is actually quite fair, but Perez I would have thought would be definitely closer to that $20 million because of that absolute machine that Red Bull have constructed this season. So at 18 million, he's going into this build for me. I really like the idea of tripling up on Red Bull, and just because of the overall consistency of that car, they've got excellent traction, fast across the board on the straights and in the braking zones. So I think if we take a look at the circuit here, that really works in the Red Bull's favour. There's a lot of long straights and braking zones throughout. So they've, I think they're in really good shape heading into this weekend. The other two I've got here in this build, Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu. I think Alfa Romeo really surprised me in the preseason. I'm not saying they are by any means the best midfield team going around, but I really liked how Zhou combined the performance of that C5 tyre across the weekend. It's got great mechanical grip, and I think he used the throttle much more effectively than that Williams, which was the other car equipped with that C5 compound. So I really like the Alphas. They both had some really good times, I believe, on the Friday or the Saturday. So I've got my eye on both of those. And then as we look down, the second constructor, Aston Martin, earlier to my point about Fernando, they've got a really good car. I definitely think they are the best of the rest out of all constructors at 6.7. Again, way too cheap for my liking, at least 2.5 times the price I think they should be at based on what we saw over the weekend, and they were able to deploy power far better than the Mercedes, for instance. They had a better lap time despite lower power unit mode as well. So and they also have really strong braking. So I'm really confident that this Aston Martin, that 6.7 million, an absolute cash cow of an asset, I cannot see that going down in price anytime soon. So if Aston Martin have a good race this coming weekend, expect that price to go through the roof. The second build I want to take a look at is another Aston Martin Red Bull constructor combination, but I want to, instead of Perez, mix it up a little bit. So these four shall stay. I want to drop in Charles Leclerc. And to go with him, I was thinking, what have we got? 4.8. So that would bring me into bargain basement territory. It doesn't really leave us with a lot of selection when you go for a premium like Leclerc. So for me, if I'm looking at these three assets, I'm steering clear of Logan Sargent, and I'm not convinced on the AlphaTauri so far. I'd like to see a little bit more performance from Tsunoda and De Vries. So that pretty much by process of elimination leaves me with Hulkenberg. I don't hate the Haas this season. I'm not saying they are going to be competing for points every week, but I think at 4.3, Hulkenberg's actually pretty good value in my opinion. I thought he'd be priced above 5. He has F1 experience, coming in below drivers like De Vries, a rookie, even Tsunoda, who is inconsistent at the best of times. I thought 4.3 was pretty cheap, and I honestly expect him to be on par, if not outperform Kevin Magnussen at various points throughout the year. So, in that Haas, if they're able to string together a few solid performances, we saw what they were capable of at the start of last season in Bahrain. Magnussen had a top 5 to kick things off. So if they're able to replicate that, Hulkenberg coming back from, some time away, much like Magnussen, anything's possible. So I really like this build. Leclerc, you know what you're getting from him. 21 million, I think, is pretty decent for him, pretty reasonable. And is the number 1 driver at Ferrari. There have been reports that he's been dissatisfied with the SF23. It has a bit of high understeer at the corner entry and in the middle. So there's talks that he may take a little bit of time to adjust to that. But over the course of the season will, in my opinion, be the second best driver, or at least over this season will be the second best driver. Was in a F1 fantasy context second best last season. He had 600, 700 points. So I really like that. But if you're a bit concerned that's a little expensive, and because you're not going to be DRS boosting Leclerc every week, if you've got Max in your team, you could always sub him out for someone like Carlos Sainz, and then upgrade someone like Hulkenberg to, I don't know, maybe a Bottas. What have we got here? 7.8. That leaves you an extra 1 million. So if you want to just go with one Alfa Romeo coverage, you could trade out Joe for someone like Alex Albon, for instance. I also really like this build. Sainz, as I said before, is probably going to, I wouldn't say have an advantage over Leclerc earlier on, but with that understeer, it could take Leclerc, as I said, a little bit of time to adjust the car, and the understeer works in favour of Sainz, if anything. So he is a more affordable Ferrari option. Should, I wouldn't say cover Leclerc, but will be in the mix for podiums almost every week. That Ferrari is looking pretty strong on the straights, and as I mentioned earlier, Bahrain's got 3 sectors with extremely long straights in it. So be sure to take that into consideration when you're picking your team for this week. As for Albon, the Williams, I don't think is going to set the world on fire by any means. It's a shame that there aren't points for beating teammates this year, because I thought Albon would absolutely smash Sargent in that regard. But I still think he looks really well suited to that Williams. He's able to get as much out of it as possible, and we saw on a number of occasions last year Albon was taking it beyond its capabilities. So I really like Albon at 5.5. I think that's pretty good value as well. So this is an alternative build with that Ferrari driver switch if you're not so keen on Leclerc. One other alternative to this build would be, again, if you want to keep Joe, say, as a cheaper alpha cover of Bottas, and I think Joe will continue to improve on a great season last year. that would leave us with 8.8 in the bank. So let's see what we've got here. That kind of doesn't give us a lot of flexibility. As I said, you could double up on Alpha. If you want to be a bit spicy, Pierre Gasly in that Alpine at 8.1, I don't mind that. The other one I really don't mind at all, despite his low ownership, is Lance Stroll. I know he's not expected to be participating in Bahrain. Drugovich obviously will be deputising for that first race, and I have no doubt that Stroll will probably need a couple of races to adjust when he returns. But given the power and performance of this Aston Martin that we're hearing, I mean, at 7.5, again, that's pretty good value. So yeah, I think just keep an eye on Stroll. I don't think I'll want him in one of these slots while Drugovich is there, but when he returns to the 4, I will definitely think about getting him into my team. The last build I want to look at is a constructor heavy build. So if we slice and dice this team here, let's go all the way up to Ferrari. The reason why I am liking Ferrari is not just because they are priced below Mercedes, which kind of renders Mercedes, not very viable at all. At that $25 million, I definitely thought after testing these two would probably be opposite prices of what they've been assigned currently. Leclerc and Sainz were both, in the top 5 times, throughout the course of last weekend. So I think they look really good. I guess as far as filling out the rest of the team is concerned, because we've exhausted, $85 million of our budget, that doesn't leave us much wiggle room at all. So if we scoot down here and take a look at what we do have available, it's probably a number of the budget drivers have already rehashed. Joe, I think, again, I really like, so I'm going to throw him in there. We've also got, we could play around with Hulk. We could, what does that leave us? 6.3, Albon. Like, these 3 budget drivers I keep, rotating. I think I like all of them for the reasons I've already mentioned. I know De Vries is a very popular choice. 28% is probably higher than I expected for someone who's only done a single race in F1. Yes, he had a sensational performance in that Williams last season. I'm not taking anything away from that, but the AlphaTauri didn't really fill me with a lot of confidence. I did touch on this in one of my other preseason videos that De Vries and Tsunoda are both in that AlphaTauri too. I'm probably going to need to give a bit of time to before I'm convinced that they're worth a spot in my team. The car isn't exactly the most powerful going around, so I want to just see before I invest in them. But I think, just looking at my notes here, because I had to make sure I was looking at the right builds. I again really like this Ferrari. The reason why I want to consider tripling up on these 2 constructors is because of the points that are weighted to the constructors. Not just in relation to qualifying and race performance, but another big thing that's been introduced this year is the fastest pit stop and the points that are assigned for the top 3 fastest pit stops on that weekend. And I wanted to do a little bit of research into this because nothing can hurt when it comes to analyzing stats, times, you name it. And I looked at some of the times from last year, as you can see here. McLaren and Red Bull are historically known as some of the best pit crews on the grid. McLaren for me will not be factoring into my constructor plans whatsoever. I know I was a little high on Lando Norris and Piastri at various points in pre-season, but after seeing testing, I'm probably going to give them a few weeks before I decide to pivot to them if I get to that point. So last season, McLaren was pretty strong across the board, and we look at the other times and drivers down the list, Bahrain, McLaren, Ferrari, Alpine, Saudi Arabia, McLaren, Red Bull, McLaren, more McLaren and Red Bull. It's getting a bit repetitive. Here we go, some Red Bull, some Aston Martin, a bit more Red Bull, and then a couple of Ferraris as well. So yes, I think pit stop points will definitely factor into it. I'm just going to scroll through a few more to give you guys some context as to who else is potentially in contention for those pit stop points. But not only that, but because as well, if we go back to the game skip through to the rules. There's also a lot of points that are weighted towards qualifying performances of the drivers, and how that factors into constructors is an added benefit when you're doubling up on two premiums. So I'm going all over the place with this mouse. So drivers, under this section, constructors will score the combined total of their two drivers in qualifying as listed above. Constructors will also score points for achieving one of the following. So, if neither driver goes beyond Q2, you're losing points. That's kind of what disincentivizes me from choosing budget constructors. One driver reaches Q2, 1 point, both 3 points. One reaches Q3, 5 points, and both Q3, 10 points. So I guess these extra points are really weighted towards those premium constructors, those Ferraris, those Red Bulls, those Mercedes, because more often than not, they're going to have both drivers, featuring in Q3. So that's why I'm inclined to potentially consider Ferrari into my plans. I don't think Aston Martin is by any means a bad choice when it comes to point scoring for qualifying, but Alonso I can definitely see in Q3 most of the time. Stroll, certainly not Drugovich, I don't think initially, but Stroll, I'd say the jury's still out on him. I actually wouldn't be surprised if he finishes P10 in the drivers this season, or in the top 10 around there, with the car they have. But he's not been known as a historically great qualifier, and over the last few seasons is, from a fantasy perspective, one that qualifies quite poorly and then makes points up over the course of the race through overtakes. So I guess that's something to think about, because there are points for overtakes. There's the pit stop information I was alluding to. Where are the overtakes? Okay, I did see a more detailed summary of win points for every overtake your drivers make. Maybe I've gone past it. Anyway, I'm sure you can find it on the page. I'm not going to spend hours and hours trying to find a needle in a haystack. But anyway, if we go back to my team, that's my old team, not to worry. I really like the idea of Ferrari as a constructor. I think, they're going to deliver points in qualifying and on race day every week. They're always going to be in the mix for podiums, and they're always going to, with Leclerc, there's a clear number one driver, so they're always going to be up and around, top 2, top 3 every weekend, even competing with Max, in qualifying on the Saturday as well as race on the Sunday. So anyway, that's a brief download of a few different drafts I have in mind. I'm really excited, as I've said, for this game to kick off on this coming weekend. And yeah, you'll no doubt hear a little bit more from me in the lead up to that. But thanks again for all of the support so far. I'm really looking forward to this season ahead with all of you guys. And as I said, if there's anything you like about what you're seeing, you want to see more of it, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel. There's going to be a lot more good stuff as we make our way through the season. So anyway, that's it for now. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.